really were. So I want to kind of just talk about that a little bit and just talk a little bit about, what might have been things that people saw in the nighttime sky back in antiquity, 9,000 years ago or 5 or 6, 7,000 years ago, as we start to talk about Napta Playa, and to kind of reiterate that. So I hope that you're doing well. God bless you. Please put your comments down below. Let me know what you think. There are a lot of people out there who have very good ideas, very good comments, and I try to read them. Sometimes I might not be able to read all of them, but I do try to read the comments, and I love what you're saying. I love the suggestions you have. Those who are members, shout out to you. Thank you so much for suggestions and what you've shared. I've read that on the member tab. I do very much appreciate that. But put your comments down below. Let's have a conversation around a discussion, because you have a lot to say and a lot to share that really adds a lot of light, sheds a lot of light on the situation and on the topics that we talk about. So I wanted to kind of talk about this whole idea of astronomy and even Nubian astronomy, and just the idea of what ancient people saw in the nighttime sky, many thousands of years ago, because I feel like when we think about science and we think about history and astrology and even astronomy and various things with respect to human beliefs and human just ancestry and human behavior and human things that have happened to us over time in history, a lot of times when we think about our activities and human activities, we have a way of looking at things in our quote unquote modern way where we just draw lines in the sands that I don't understand, that I really don't think existed, right? So we like to say, history began here. Like literally we have a time when we think history began, and then we'll try to say, well, it's written history and these people over here were the first people to do this, when in actuality, that's not how things happen. A lot of things happen and they grow up naturally for people, naturally out of time. And, a lot of things with respect to what we consider to be significant human advances and things that human beings did happen a long time before we say they happened. They happened a long time before we talk about it in history. And we need to give some credence to that. And as I think about it, and I start to think about astronomy and the way we look at the nighttime sky and the things that we can see, and I start to ask myself the question, not just when did people start to write? It's this crazy thing. I think that we have this idea and this notion that somehow history is important when we say people started to write. Not that writing is not important, and not that there's probably writing that we don't even know of. And I think any term, any form of written or even if you did rock art or any type of scripts or inscriptions that you made that communicated something to me, that's writing. That's writing. So we like to say though that writing in this way is the first time history began. And we kind of just use it away, I believe, racistly and biasedly to kind of discount what other people did many, many thousands of years, not even knowing everything that those people did. And so we like to put things in a box. And I think that we need to apply significant, intelligent, analysis and analysis to what we think about as we think about what people did and how people do. God bless you. Hope your peace to you as well. Very good. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you, JBR. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Peace to you as well. I think that we have to apply our common sense, right? Because I like to ask, and tell me what you think, down below. It's not just, when people wrote, when did language begin? When we think about what makes human beings remarkable, I think about things, our ability to be able to communicate in very various, difficult or sometimes challenging or complex ways, our ability to communicate thoughts and ideas and feelings and messages to one another in a way that's systematic, right? In a way that really shows an incredible amount of intelligence. So it's not just, when did writing begin? When did language begin? This particular figurine is a figurine of a man, a male. You can see like his nose there, his mouth, you can see his head. This is made out of ivory. And this is from the Nile Valley and what would have been ancient Kemet, or before Kemet was Kemet. So some 3,800 BC, some 5,800 years ago. Long before this figurine was made, people were doing amazing things. Long before the person who made this wonderful figurine that's lasted for thousands of years, people were doing amazing things. And when I think about it, when you think about the nighttime sky and you think about being there in the deserts in the Nile Valley and what the night sky would have looked like, what it would have looked like to you, what you would have seen if you just looked up without all of the pollution, the light pollution we have now and all the things that kind of cloud our view and block our view of the nighttime sky. You would have seen thousands and thousands of stars in the sky. You would have seen, literally, you would have looked up and you would have seen the sky filled with stars, right? And as you think about that, how long does it really take for people to start to notice that? I mean, you would have to understand that the idea of looking at the stars and studying the stars and using the stars to help guide you in certain ways would have been a significant thing that you would have done thousands of years, even before this figurine was made. And as I think about that, And we kind of look at that. I think about, even you look at, and I'm pointing right here, the constellation Orion, and you can kind of just see this depiction of people kind of looking at that and being able to make some type of image in the sky so that they can kind of tell us. So people have done this for many thousands of years. People have looked up at the sky and made patterns and seen the patterns that are naturally there, and did things with them. So if you were back in ancient Kemet, and if you were in Napta Playa, which we have talked about, if you were in Napta Playa and you were in a situation where you're in a desert, right? And this is the oldest astronomical observatory in the world. This is the oldest one in the world. This is the first one that we know of right here in Napta Playa. It is something that is remarkable. So imagine being in a desert, and imagine when the sun went down, you're having a sky full of nighttime, a sky full of stars. You use the stars for many things. And when you look at Napta Playa, and you guys can tell me what you've seen and what you think, but there are several sites in this whole area that is in the western part, west of the Nile, if you will, right on the border where modern day Egypt is and the Sudan is today. So that would have been what we would become Nubia. That would be part of Nubia. So at this time, we're talking about Napta Playa. The oldest villages in Napta Playa have been dated. Now, this is just what they've been dated to 9,000 BC. So 11,000 years before Christ. And you can find this particular astronomical observatory to being at least 5,000 BC. So at least 7,000 years old. This particular structure is, and they know that it was aligned with Sirius, the star Sirius, which is Sopdet in the Kemetic language. It was aligned with the star Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. So just imagine if you had these people who went around as the desert was drying out, and they began to go to various places. They begin to see, a lot of different things taking place, and they begin to have to search for water. And as they search for water from one place to another, especially when they had to travel, you would use the nighttime sky and as well as other things to help you know where to go. So imagine just like people did in modern America when people were being enslaved and treated in that way, use the sky and the natural landscapes to get where they needed to do that. They did that thousands of years, tens of thousands of years ago. This is not anything new. When we start to think about the study of astronomy, it did not begin just where people want to say it didn't begin in Europe. It didn't begin in some other place. More than likely, it began where people began, in Africa. Tens of thousands. The first human beings, the first Homo sapiens on Earth are in Africa, and they're found in various places. They're found in Morocco and Ethiopia and South Africa, around the continent at least 300,000 years ago. And they are Homo sapiens like you and I, human beings like you and I. To think that we were in a situation where we are looking up at the nighttime sky and we're not using the resources that we have to help us understand what's happening. You have moving stars, and you would see comets being shot. You would see all types of things taking place if you were looking up at that nighttime sky. You begin to use that as a way to navigate. So one of the things they think they did with some of these sites that they found, as well as some of the archaeological remains, is that they used the nighttime sky to help them navigate as they traveled around the desert at that time. So at the time you get around 7,000 BC, the Sahara Desert is rapidly drying out. There was a period of time prior to that, as you know, there was green Sahara, where things were grassland and people could take their cattle and small animals and actually live and subsist, if you will, off of the land and off of the grasses that were there to be able to feed their cattle. But as the land continuously dried out, you had to find water, right? Which is one of the reasons why the Nile Valley became so important, because by the time we have this gentleman and this figurine being made, the Nile Valley is pretty much dried out. And you find people really gathering around the Nile and that river. And it's not just one type of person. People like to think that people were segregated. All kinds of people who were in the area would have gone toward the water, right? You would have met, people would go towards water because you needed to survive, and they would have lived together, and they would have had all types of experiences together. Not the way we like to look at it in history, where, these people must have just killed these people or taken over these people. We have a very just weird way of looking at history, drawing it in a way, I think, to make us feel good or to fit our view of the world, not necessarily what may have happened. So as we start to think about this, and we start to look at the nighttime sky, and we sort of see what they may have seen, we find that even thousands of years ago, even 10,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, people are looking at the sky like they would have been doing, I believe, even before this, and they're using it to navigate. They're seeing patterns in the sky, just like you would imagine anybody might see a pattern in the sky. They're looking up at the sky, and they're seeing patterns, and they're making things in their mind, and they're using it for significant reasons. And the reason why it becomes important in particular Napta Playa, the reason why it becomes important here is that when you look at Sirius, Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. So when you look at it, it's a huge star. It really, in some ways, is larger than our sun. It really has a lot more brightness than our sun, and has a lot of characteristics that are dynamic. Sirius has. It kind of shocks you. And when you think about Sirius at this time, and even as you move farther along in Kemetic history, you can read about it. You find that the monsoons and the rains and the water and the flood that would take place in the Nile at a certain time of the year, given the rains that would come in the rainy season, would coincide with the reemergence of Sirius in the nighttime sky. So when you see that, and this wasn't just for a period of 200 years, it was for a period of thousands of years, you would have seen that Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, would have been visible for a period of time in the year, and then it would have gone away. And it would have gone away for about 70 days. And then when it came back, it happened to coincide with the flooding of the Nile, which would have been a very significant event in terms of your ability to live, with water being, much more readily available and more widespread as you move closer and closer to the Nile. So not only was Sirius an important star in Kemetic history, let's say 3800, 3200 BC, but even when you start to look at Napta Playa, thousands of years before Kemet, before there was an ancient Kemet, before there was a Kush, before there were all these things that we like to point at as being like a start for history or a start that's important, people are doing this. People are doing amazing things. And this particular astronomical observatory and ceremonial site is aligned with the summer solstice. So it's marking the summer solstice at a way that when the sun is at its highest point and the longest day, you would find that this area, certain of these stones that are erect, do not cast a shadow. People were literally lining up that way. It's also aligned and marking Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. And it would have been perhaps used in various ways, because you find huge burial mounds where cattle were buried in this area, and you found several sites where people would have traveled to. It would have also perhaps been used as a way to navigate, to find your way back to this area, because it was a part of a basin where you might have been able to find water at certain times of the year. And various places would have been like that, and the sky would have been something that would help you. So when you start to think about the manner in which people used astronomy, the manner in which people looked at the sky and analyzed it and thought about it themselves, they were doing remarkable things 10,000 years ago. Even tens of thousands of years ago, I believe. And if you look at it, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of a picture of this as I kind of close this. If you look at Orion's belt there, you kind of see the person pointing to it. You see those three stars in a row that are kind of in the middle. They point to Sirius. So you can see that today. You can see that in the nighttime sky. You can take a look at the sky. If you see Orion, it really jumps out at you because you see those three stars in a row. And those stars have been used in many famous ways throughout history. But you see those three stars in a row, and they point to the brightest star in the sky. And it's like, kind of point that, I'll put this right here. You can see that Sirius is like right here. So if you look at Sirius is like right here. If you kind of look up, you can see the three stars in the right hand corner. You see the three stars in a row, and they kind of point to Sirius. So you can almost see this yourself. You don't have to be kind of like an astronomer or somebody who is an astrophysicist to kind of see this. You can begin to make observations yourself. God bless you. Have peace to you as well. You can begin to make observations yourself and see that I can point out this star. I can go out right now, wherever you are. If you can get a look, you don't have enough light pollution. You can get a look. You can see Orion and what we call Orion. You can see the three stars. You can see the constellations and make up your own constellation wheel, and you can find Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, just above the horizon. And depending upon where you are on Earth, especially in the northern hemisphere, you can see that. And so you can actually take a look at these things today, and to think that human beings were not doing this tens of thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago, they were. And a lot of the information we have, a lot of the archaeological record we have shows us that they were. So as I start to look back, and I look back at Napta Playa, which is the oldest astronomical observatory in the world, and I start to think about various things that people did long before there was an Egypt, before there was Kemet, we have to, in our own minds, we have to kind of reclaim our own essence and our own ideas about history, because the way people teach it to us, they teach it to us without giving us all the facts. They teach it to us with ignoring us. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about and read about ancient Kemet, and one, we call it Egypt, right? And that's not what they call themselves. We read about ancient Kemet, and they don't even mention Napta Playa. And you can find very few people, and it's only when they're talking about a particular subject do they make any connection with Napta Playa, because this would have been in the area that would have been called Nubia, right? And this would have predated Kemet by thousands of years. This astronomical observatory would have predated ancient Kemet by thousands of years. How do you account for that? And to think somehow that the people who were in the Nile Valley, roaming around the Nile Valley, close to the Nile, farther away from the Nile, like Napta Playa, in various places in this area where human beings are known to have been for hundreds of thousands of years, even millions of years, and to think that they were somehow not related to the people who would become ancient Kemet and who would rise up ancient Kemet, it just doesn't make sense. It's kind of silly. And I think that's why people separate it. People don't want to make that connection that these things were going on in the Nile Valley, long before Kemet was a country. And in all likelihood, the same people and their descendants, right? These people were part of the people who helped to raise these civilizations and these societies closer to the Nile as the area dried out. So whether they ended up, raising societies and settling down in the area that became Kush, right? Around the third cataract of Nile, near what we call Kerma, or right on the border for the Sudan and Egypt and modern day Egypt and Sudan, right there on the second cataract of Nile, or the first cataract, or what was Auset, wherever they began to set up their societies up there. And Naqada or Naqada, however you like to pronounce it, wherever they begin to set up their societies, they're a part of a larger movement and a much more historic movement that did scientific things, that did amazing things long before we give them credit. So I want to make that point, because as I think about astronomy and the amazing things that you and I could observe today, there's no reason to think that they were not observing them thousands of years ago. And we have proof that they were. I mean, they literally have proof of how this particular observatory aligned with Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, which they would have easily been able to see, especially with no light pollution, how it aligned with the summer solstice, how it was a veneration of cattle, and how they did other things with certain stars like Arcturus, and other bright stars in the sky, that this was a significant thing. So as you start to think about this, you start to understand that human beings are doing magnificent things long before we give them credit. And we ourselves have to reclaim that. We can't wait for somebody to tell us that people did things that we know they did that made sense. So I want to kind of to stop there and look a little bit in the comments to see some of what you have to say, because I know a lot of times have significant things. So yeah, Team Z, it's a very interesting star. There's a lot that the Dogon have done with it. And that's a famous, analogy and a famous occurrence with respect to what the Dogon know. But I know that there are a lot of people who know a lot about this. And it becomes significant because I think the study of astronomy, many of our children and many people in general just may not think about how people all over the world, and in particular how African people participated in sciences like astronomy, right? Like all kinds of things, and whether it's agriculture and developing, pottery and developing other scientific methods for coloring things and even writing and various things, mathematics. There are all kinds of things that go into observing the sky and building an observatory. Like, you really don't build an observatory like that without some form of math. Like, that's another thing that's significant to say. We know that they did it, but it's really hard to build an observatory like this without any form of math, without any form of alignment, without any form. How do you make the circle almost a circle? You're doing some type of measurement, whether they had, how they did it, whether they had measurements the same way we would have measurements today. We would have to speculate, but it's almost assured that if you had a society in some kind of way, you count it in some kind of way, you use measurements in some kind of way, you use some type of cooperation in some kind of way. There were scientific measurements and scientific applications being applied tens of thousands of years before ancient Kemet became a country. So I just wanted to share that. I'd love to hear what your comments down below. And I think we should keep getting that message out there so that people will know it and our young people know it. God bless you. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.